Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we bring you the chilling and brutal story of Frank Nitti, known as the Enforcer. He was Al Capone's trusted right-hand man, a figure who controlled Chicago's underworld with an iron fist and left behind a legacy of violence, power, and fear. How did Nitti rise from the shadows to become one of the most feared figures in organized crime? And what drove this man to eventually unravel under the weight of his own empire? Stay with us as we unravel the dark and suspenseful tale of Frank Nitti, the Enforcer's brutal legacy. What happens when the shadow of a notorious crime boss becomes even more terrifying than the man himself? Frank Nitti, Al Capone's right-hand man, ruled Chicago's underworld with ruthless precision, leaving a trail of blood and fear in his wake. But how did a man once dismissed as an outsider rise to such brutal power? And what dark secrets led to his shocking downfall? Frank Nitti's story began on the harsh, unforgiving streets of Chicago in the early 1900s. Born Francesco Raffaele Nitto in Angri, Italy in 1886, he arrived in America with his family as a young boy, like many immigrants of the time, in search of a better life. What they found instead were crowded tenements, relentless poverty, and the constant sting of discrimination. Life in the Italian-American neighborhoods of Chicago offered little hope for upward mobility, and survival often depended on street smarts, grit, and an ability to adapt. Frank's early life was defined by struggle. After dropping out of school at a young age, he found work as a barber, a trade that gave him access to the secrets and gossip of local businessmen and mobsters alike. This environment served as an entry point into the criminal underworld. The Prohibition era, with its ban on alcohol, had turned Chicago into a hotbed of illicit activity. Speakeasies and bootleggers thrived in the shadows, and the city's underbelly was ruled by gangs vying for control of the lucrative black market liquor trade. It was during this chaotic time that Nitti began forging connections with influential figures in organized crime. Among them was Johnny Torrio, a mob boss who introduced him to a young and ambitious Al Capone. Capone, rising rapidly through the ranks, saw potential in Nitti's intelligence and adaptability. Nitti was different from the brutish enforcers who often surrounded gang leaders. He was calculated, sharp, and willing to do whatever was necessary to get the job done. As Capone's star rose, so did Nitti's. He became an essential part of Capone's operations, helping to organize smuggling routes and distribute illegal alcohol throughout the city. The two men complemented each other perfectly. Capone was the flamboyant, larger-than-life figure who dominated headlines, while Nitti thrived in the shadows, quietly building the logistical backbone of their empire. But with power came danger. The Prohibition era was not just a time of opportunity for criminals, it was also a period of intense violence. Rival gangs constantly clashed in bloody turf wars, leaving a trail of bodies in their wake. Nitti's early years in the organization were marked by his transformation into a key enforcer, someone who could intimidate, negotiate, or eliminate threats as needed. His ability to balance brutality with business sense made him invaluable to Capone. The Chicago Beer Wars, a series of violent conflicts between rival gangs over control of the city's alcohol trade, cemented Nitti's reputation. He was often the man behind the scenes, orchestrating hits on competitors or overseeing the smooth operation of Capone's supply chain. While Capone became a household name, Nitti remained an enigma feared by those who knew him but virtually invisible to the public eye. By the late 1920s, Nitti's role had expanded significantly. His intelligence and loyalty earned him Capone's complete trust, and he was increasingly tasked with enforcing discipline within the organization. However, this loyalty came at a cost. The attention of federal agents, particularly Eliot Ness and his untouchables, began to focus on Capone's operation. The pressure was mounting, and the empire they had built on fear and violence was beginning to show cracks. Frank Nitti had risen from a poor immigrant barber to one of the most powerful figures in Chicago's criminal underworld. But with the authorities closing in and rival gangs eager to seize power, the stakes were higher than ever. Nitti's ascent was far from over, but the path ahead would prove even more dangerous, filled with betrayals, bold moves, and devastating consequences. As Al Capone's empire grew, so did the responsibilities of Frank Nitti. While Capone enjoyed the spotlight, charming the public and taunting law enforcement with his audacity, Nitti operated in the shadows, building a fearsome reputation as the mob's enforcer. He was the man who handled problems quickly, ruthlessly, and without hesitation. His nickname, the Enforcer, was earned not just through brute force, but through his relentless ability to enforce the syndicate's rules, collect debts, and silence anyone who threatened their control. The Prohibition era had transformed Chicago into a battlefield. The lucrative business of bootlegging drew countless rivals, each eager to carve out their share of the market. The Chicago outfit, under Capone's leadership, dominated the trade, but it was Nitti who ensured that dominance endured. He managed the organization's network of suppliers, distributors, and enforcers with military-like precision, ensuring the flow of illegal alcohol remained uninterrupted. One of Nitti's most notorious acts during this period was his orchestration of several violent hits during the Chicago Beer Wars. These conflicts, which pitted Capone's outfit against rival gangs, were brutal and unrelenting. Bodies piled up in the streets as gangs fought for control over speakeasies and smuggling routes. While Capone's name was attached to many of these crimes, it was often Nitti who coordinated the attacks from behind the scenes, making sure they were swift and effective. Nitti's strategic mind set him apart from many other gangsters of his time. He understood that raw violence alone wasn't enough to maintain power. It had to be coupled with fear, respect, and careful planning. Under his watch, the outfit's operations expanded beyond alcohol. Gambling dens, brothels, and extortions became additional sources of income, each meticulously managed to avoid unnecessary attention from law enforcement. But not all attention could be avoided. Elliot Ness and his team of untouchables had begun their relentless campaign to dismantle Capone's empire. While the mobsters had managed to bribe or intimidate many law enforcement officials, Ness was incorruptible. His team's raids on breweries and speakeasies disrupted the outfit's operations, and their relentless pursuit of evidence against Capone created cracks in the once impenetrable empire. While Capone faced growing legal troubles, Nitti worked tirelessly to keep the organization afloat. His ability to remain calm under pressure and adapt to changing circumstances made him invaluable during these turbulent times. Yet even Nitti couldn't shield the organization from the increasing scrutiny. The federal government's focus on Capone's tax evasion provided Ness with the opening he needed, and in 1931, Capone was convicted and sentenced to prison. With Capone behind bars, the question of leadership loomed large over the Chicago outfit. Many expected chaos, a power struggle among the organization's key figures. But Nitti quickly emerged as the natural successor. His years of loyalty and strategic brilliance had earned him the trust of the outfit's top lieutenants. He wasn't the loud, brash figure that Capone had been. He was quiet, methodical, and calculating, a man who thrived in the shadows. As Nitti took control, he faced challenges on all sides. Rival gangs sought to exploit the outfit's perceived weakness, while law enforcement ramped up their efforts to dismantle what remained of the empire. Nitti was no stranger to danger, but the stakes were higher than ever. With his reputation as the enforcer solidified, he now had to prove he could do more than maintain order. He had to lead. Nitti's rise to power was a testament to his resilience and cunning, but his new role came with its own set of risks, as enemies both within and outside the organization began to conspire against him. The man who had spent years enforcing the rules would soon find himself navigating an increasingly treacherous landscape, where loyalty was fleeting and betrayal lurked around every corner. After Al Capone's imprisonment in 1931, Frank Nitti stepped into the role of leader for the Chicago outfit. But unlike his predecessor, Nitti had no desire for the limelight. He understood the dangers of drawing too much attention to himself, having seen how Capone's flamboyant lifestyle had made him a target for law enforcement. Instead, Nitti preferred to operate behind the scenes, a shadowy figure pulling the strings of one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the country. Under Nitti's leadership, the outfit underwent a strategic transformation. With Prohibition nearing its end, the organization needed new revenue streams to replace the lucrative but waning bootlegging business. Nitti recognized the potential in diversifying their operations and began expanding into gambling, labor racketeering, and extortion. These ventures required a level of finesse and subtlety that Nitti excelled at. He leveraged bribes, blackmail, and intimidation to gain influence over labor unions, politicians, and even law enforcement officials. His most audacious move, however, was extending the outfit's reach into Hollywood. By targeting the film industry's labor unions, Nitti orchestrated a series of extortion schemes that siphoned money from some of the most powerful studios in the world. This marked a significant shift in the outfit's operations, taking their influence beyond Chicago and into new, uncharted territory. It also solidified Nitti's reputation as a mastermind who could adapt to changing times. Despite his success, Nitti's leadership wasn't without challenges. Within the outfit, there were whispers of dissent. Figures like Tony Accardo and Paul Ricca, once loyal lieutenants, began questioning Nitti's decisions. They saw his increasing reliance on risky ventures like the Hollywood extortion schemes as a potential liability. Nitti, ever calculating, worked to maintain order within his ranks, but the seeds of discord had been sown. On the streets, rival gangs also sought to exploit any perceived weaknesses in the outfit's new direction. The once unified underworld of Chicago was fracturing, and smaller factions began challenging the outfit's dominance. Nitti responded with his usual blend of calculated ruthlessness, orchestrating hits on key rivals, and sending a clear message that the outfit was still a force to be reckoned with. Yet, it wasn't just external threats that Nitti had to contend with. Law enforcement was still watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Federal authorities were particularly interested in Nitti's Hollywood operations, which had begun attracting unwanted attention. As investigations into labor racketeering intensified, Nitti found himself under increasing pressure. Paranoia began to creep into Nitti's once unshakable demeanor. He had spent years carefully managing the outfit's operations, always staying one step ahead of his enemies. But now he was surrounded by threats on all sides, rivals plotting his downfall, associates questioning his leadership, and federal agents closing in. Despite his best efforts to hold the organization together, cracks were beginning to show. The man who had once been Al Capone's trusted enforcer was now burdened with the weight of leading an empire that seemed to grow more fragile with each passing day. As tensions mounted, Nitti's decisions became increasingly bold, and with them, the risks grew greater. While he had succeeded in steering the Chicago outfit through the turbulent years after Capone's fall, Nitti was entering a dangerous new phase of his career. The foundations he had built were being tested, and with enemies both inside and outside the organization circling, it was only a matter of time before the cracks in his empire became impossible to ignore. As the 1940s approached, Frank Nitti found himself in the crosshairs of federal authorities. His involvement in the Chicago outfit's Hollywood extortion racket had brought a level of scrutiny he had long worked to avoid. The scheme had been bold, forcing studios to pay hefty sums through manipulated union contracts, but it was also reckless, leaving a trail of evidence that law enforcement couldn't ignore. Investigators had begun unraveling the web of corruption, and the pressure on Nitti grew by the day. With the federal government closing in, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Nitti, once known for his careful calculations, found himself cornered. The threat of indictment was imminent, and with it, the possibility of a lengthy prison sentence. For a man who thrived in control, the idea of being trapped behind bars was unbearable. His growing paranoia became evident to those around him, and the once unshakable enforcer began to show signs of desperation. Within the outfit, tensions were reaching a boiling point. Tony Accardo and Paul Ricca, two of Nitti's top lieutenants, had grown increasingly critical of his leadership. They believed the Hollywood extortion schemes had gone too far, exposing the organization to unnecessary risk. The outfit had survived for decades by operating in the shadows, but Nitti's decisions had brought the full weight of federal attention crashing down on them. Privately, Accardo and Ricca began to distance themselves from Nitti's inner circle, discussing the possibility of a leadership change. While they respected his past contributions to the outfit, they feared that his increasingly erratic behavior would jeopardize the entire operation. Nitti, ever attuned to the undercurrents of betrayal, sensed their unease. The paranoia that had taken root within him only deepened, leaving him isolated and distrustful of even his closest allies. As federal prosecutors prepared their case, Nitti faced a choice: fight the charges in court or take more drastic action to silence those who could testify against him. Reports surfaced that he considered ordering hits on key witnesses, a move that would have been both bold and reckless. But such a plan carried immense risk, threatening to unravel the outfit's delicate balance of power. The growing pressure took a toll on Nitti's health. Known for his sharp mind and cold precision, he began to unravel under the weight of his collapsing empire. His once iron grip on the outfit was slipping, and with it, his confidence. Each day brought new challenges, from government subpoenas to whispers of betrayal within his ranks. When the day finally came for him to appear before the grand jury, Nitti was a shadow of his former self. The man who had spent decades operating in the shadows, outsmarting rivals and law enforcement alike, now stood on the brink of public disgrace. Facing prison time and the possibility of losing everything he had built, Nitti made a decision that shocked even his closest associates. Rather than confront his enemies in court or fight for control of the outfit, he chose a different path, one that would leave his allies scrambling for power and his enemies stunned by the sudden void in leadership. The man who had spent his life enforcing rules and eliminating threats was about to make the most drastic decision of all, one that would forever mark the end of an era in the Chicago underworld. Frank Nitti's life came to an abrupt and shocking end in 1943, leaving behind a legacy that continues to intrigue and haunt historians and crime enthusiasts alike. As federal prosecutors closed in on the Chicago outfit's Hollywood extortion schemes, Nitti was left with few options. Facing the prospect of a trial that could expose the full extent of his criminal operations and a likely prison sentence, he made a decision that stunned the underworld and the public alike. On a cold March morning, Nitti left his home for what would be the final time. He walked to a rail yard near his residence, his demeanor distant and resolute. The man who had once commanded fear and respect throughout Chicago now seemed like a shell of his former self. As he reached the tracks, witnesses reported seeing him pace back and forth, visibly distressed. Moments later, a gunshot shattered the quiet morning air. Frank Nitti, the feared enforcer of the Chicago outfit, was dead by his own hand. The news of Nitti's suicide sent shockwaves through the city. Law enforcement and rival gangs alike had expected him to fight to the bitter end, as he had done countless times before. Instead, his death left a void in the outfit's leadership and raised more questions than answers. Why would a man who had risen from the slums of Chicago to become one of the most powerful figures in organized crime choose such an end? Some speculated that the pressure from federal investigations had simply become too much for Nitti to bear. Prison, for a man of his stature, was not just a loss of freedom, but a devastating blow to his carefully crafted image of control and power. Others suggested that his health had been deteriorating, both mentally and physically, and that he saw no way out of the mounting challenges he faced. Within the outfit, his death sparked immediate turmoil. Tony Accardo and Paul Recca, who had already been positioning themselves as potential successors, moved quickly to consolidate power. Nitti's absence created an opportunity for a more unified and cautious leadership. Under their guidance, the outfit would go on to thrive in the decades that followed, shifting focus away from the flashy crimes that had drawn so much attention and toward quieter, more lucrative operations in gambling and legitimate businesses. For law enforcement, Nitti's death was both a victory and a missed opportunity. While it marked the end of a powerful figure in the Chicago underworld, it also meant that valuable information about the outfit's operations and connections would die with him. Federal agents continued to pursue the outfit, but they were left piecing together fragments of a puzzle that Nitti might have unraveled had he been alive to testify. In the years that followed, Nitti's name became synonymous with the brutal efficiency and strategic cunning of the Chicago outfit. His rise from a poor immigrant barber to one of the most feared men in organized crime was a testament to his intelligence, ambition, and ruthless determination. Yet his sudden and tragic end underscored the high cost of living a life in the shadows. Frank Nitti's story remains a haunting reminder of the fragility of power and the lengths to which a man will go to maintain it. Though he operated in the shadows, his influence shaped the very foundations of organized crime in America. And while his death marked the end of an era for the Chicago outfit, the legacy of his brutal reign endures as a dark chapter in the history of the city he once ruled. Thank you for watching this episode of Mystery Minds. Frank Nitti's story reminds us that even the most powerful figures can fall, and the price of crime often comes due in ways no one expects. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the dark world of true crime. Let us know in the comments what case you'd like us to cover next. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.